Hello, everyone, and welcome to another informative episode of the Florida Business Forum podcast. Let's open the Florida Business Forum floodgates and let the information begin to flow. Here's your Florida Business Forum information guru and anchorman, Sam Yates.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting edition of the Florida Business Forum. I'm your host, Sam Yates, and I have a special guest today who is a repeat performer guest. And that is important because we are doing our best to try to make sure that you are safe during hurricane season, which is just around the corner. And what better person to assist us in making that mission possible than Jamie Rhome, Deputy Director from the National Hurricane Center. Jamie, thank you for taking time out of a very, very busy schedule to join us once again this year.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
You know, I'm going to say at the top of the show, and I say this for a reason because I know it's something that's important to you, because we're going to delve into storm surge. And I know that a lot of people have in the past poo-pooed storm surge, but we saw some tremendous impact from storm surge on the west coast of Florida. So we're going to come back to that. So, Jamie, we're still weeks ahead of the hurricane season start officially. Although I'm going to the Hurricane Center website and I'm tracking the tropics, is that a little bit earlier this year than it has been in years past?
You know, there's been a lot of discussion of late about hurricane season shifting, forward, and we sat down and we looked at this, and there's not enough of a noticeable shift in hurricane or tropical storm activity to warrant changing the start of hurricane season. But I think to your point, people probably are thinking about and executing upon hurricane season earlier and earlier, as evidenced by the aggressive campaign and outreach, such as venues like this, to get the word out. So yeah, probably people are coming to our website earlier in the year to learn about how to be prepared for hurricane season.
Well, I'm going to ask a question. It's going to sound sort of a reverse question. Because you're the person that's telling us, but what are you hearing from all of the intelligence that goes on behind the Hurricane Center of what our season is shaping up to be or forecast to be at this time?
So I'm going to be really blunt. Our ability to predict the season at this early stage is limited, very, very, very limited. That doesn't stop other voices in the world from making such speculation. But when it comes down to what the season's going to be like, or if you're going to get impacted, if my state or my community is going to get impacted, the answer is at this early stage, we don't know. And that's just being honest and upfront, with everyone. The ability to detail what's going to happen in the season so far out in time is the science, the prediction is just not there yet.
I want to seize on that for a moment, but the science is constantly getting better. And something that you said last year really stuck in my mind, that we may be reaching a plateau for forecasting and what we can do with the science. Has that thought changed since last year? Are we still reaching that top of the ceiling?
Yeah. So for track, that's what we call it, the limits of predictability. So it doesn't mean that predictability stalls, or it just means that the growth is very small. So instead of big leaps in track forecasting skill, you get more incremental improvements over the course of years. On intensity, they're still, we've gotten substantially better, like shockingly better, especially at rapid intensification over the last 5 years. There's still a little bit of room to go there in terms of improvement. And really the next frontier in hurricane forecasting, the next big sort of push or leap, is what we call structure, which is the size and shape of the storm, meaning how far out do the winds extend, hurricane force winds at one spot, are they, all over, that type of aspect of hurricane forecasting. There's still a great deal of work to do there.
Is that one of the reasons that we've seen some modification of our our cone of uncertainty, as some people call it. I call it a cone of accuracy, because it seems to be getting better and better.
Yeah, so that's based off the track improvements that we just talked about. So the cone is swept out by the last 5 years of track error or accuracy, if you will. So as the cone shrinks, that's a sign that track forecasting is improving. That's good news, right? That's great news. Track forecasting is improving. The problem is everybody wants one product or one scale or one widget that tells them everything. And as the cone shrinks, more and more of the hurricane is falling outside of the cone, meaning the peripheral, the rain, the surge, the wind, some of that peripheral stuff is falling out. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people are looking at the cone, they're outside of the cone, and they're saying, this doesn't include me, this is not my problem. And then they experience, in some cases, pretty devastating impacts. So yes, that's one of the reasons why the cone needs to start being modernized and improved to better account for those components.
And I think this is probably a good point for maybe me to editorialize just a little bit, because I can do that safely. I've got some questions from our audience, but I tend to listen to what people say on social media, and Jamie, it seems like everywhere I turn as we get into hurricane season, someone has become an expert in telling their neighbors and everyone else what to do. Not necessarily what to do. What to do can be helpful, but when someone is disagreeing with what the forecast is and saying, "Oh no, it's going to do this because I've gotten the information from Dr. Google,"
right?
That's a little dangerous, in my opinion.
It's probably what I would consider the greatest challenge we face in hurricane communication. I think it's great that there's such mass public interest in weather forecasting, and especially hurricanes. I mean, that's good for getting public awareness up and getting people to pay attention. The problem is that's created a space where it's relatively easy for people to convince themselves and others that they are an expert. It's relatively easy to make professional looking, social media and videos. And it can be hard to distinguish between a trusted expert and someone who's just doing this as a hobby. And that is literally flooding the arena with bad and often conflicting information, which causes paralysis in terms of public response and people doing what they need to do during a hurricane.
And I set that up so that we could do a segue into some questions from our audience. I'm happy to say that for the second year in a row, we're up at number one as far as the best number one rated business, and I stress business, forum podcast in the state of Florida. And we get a lot of people wanting to be on the program because of that. But it also means that our audience is playing a role. So I thought it only important and fitting to take a couple of questions, not doing it live, but I ask our audience in advance, hey, we've got the Deputy Director for the National Hurricane Center coming on the program. What would you like to ask him? So I've got 5 questions. Bob L. from Pinecrest Lakes in Martin County asks, is it common to have tornadoes in a hurricane? We experienced a number of tornadoes in our last hurricane.
He's probably talking about Hurricane Milton, is my guess. It is not common to have tornadoes in every hurricane, but when you do, they tend to be widespread, big outbreaks. And so that's what makes the communication and preparedness part challenging, because it's not necessarily always there, but when it is there, it's a very high impact event. Martin County was in Palm Beach County were some of the harder hit areas, if he's referring to Milton. And while that has historically been an element, back to the whole thing about structure being the part that we need to work on, that has been an element because it is structurally dependent. It's dependent more on the structure of the storm and how it's interacting with the broader environment than it is on, say, just how strong the storm is, for example. And but we've gotten much better. So we've gotten much better, and I think you're going to see huge strides in our ability to distinguish the big tornado outbreak hurricanes from the regular hurricanes that don't necessarily have the tornadoes.
Chuck S. from Hobe Sound. How does El Nino and La Nina affect ocean temperatures, and how does that impact our hurricane season? And are we going to have a super El Nino this year?
Well, Chuck has managed to ask the number one question I'm asked outside of work at dinner parties, or just parties. It's the $1 million question, but I need to unpack it just 1 second. So okay. The El Nino and its counterpart La Nina tend to be one of the larger contributors to whether we have a busy season or an inactive season, but it's not the only contributor. Let me say that again. It is not the only contributor. Media tends to talk about, or just general knowledge or general conversation tends to focus on only that. But there's several other things happening that go into whether or not a given season is busy or not, or whether the activity is skewed towards land or over water. So let me just preface it by that. Now, what we know right now is that we're probably going to be moving into an El Nino phase. But there's still unknowns about that, because sometimes there's a lag between the start of the El Nino and its sort of influence on the season, and then there's these other contributors here. So while El Nino itself tends to suppress hurricane activity, I don't think the presence of El Nino alone in the forecast can allow one to jump to the conclusion that we would have an inactive season. Does that help?
I think that helps a lot. And I always tell people when they get into some of those discussions, it only takes one. We could have the best darn hurricane season in the world and get the worst hurricane ever. It only takes one to make for a bad day. So Patrick S., Westwood Country Estates, related to the tornadoes in the last hurricane, choice of Cat 5 with a few tornadoes or a Cat 3 and 4 with many tornadoes, what role does wind shear play? And I take it that he is asking, as the hurricane gets close to the coast and wind shear is diminishing it, does that play a role in tornado activity within a hurricane because of the shear?
This is a great question, because it goes back to and helps us to elaborate on the trusted expert. Mm-hmm. So people who maybe just dabble in hurricanes, they may assume that the presence of wind shear is good, and sort of advertise that. And it may be good in the sense that the peak wind intensity could come down, but that same wind shear could create more tornadoes or could create heavy rain, from a storm. And so that's why you really got to have an expert who can break down the risk specific to this storm, this situation, this community, what have you, versus these analogs, that you see people sort of talking about. So wind shear can cut both ways is the bottom line. I don't know that the presence of wind shear is necessarily always a good thing. It really depends on the exact makeup of the storm and its proximity to land.
Jane G., Golden Isles. I'm not quite sure where Golden Isles is, but I'm glad that she's part of our audience. If we do not have hurricanes or tropical storms this season, will Florida's drought be worse during the next dry season? Are storms our natural way of replenishing Florida's water supply?
So Jane's onto something here. Hurricanes are a natural phenomenon that's meant to create balance of heat and energy in the globe, meaning without them, the equator would just get hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. So their natural purpose is to transport heat and moisture and energy sort of away from the equator up to the poles and sort of create balance. You still sort of think of them as the Robin Hood of weather, if you will, sort of to create balance. The problem is in the creation of that balance is they move things around, and if it juxtaposed next to land, then it creates bad outcomes. And in many places, in many parts of the world, these storms bring natural rain that is needed. In some places they are drought busters. And so it really, to answer Jane's question, it really depends on where Florida is in sort of this water management phase, drought phase. A weak system that produces just a little bit of rain could be advantageous, but, and this is a big but, more often than not, they produce too much of whatever it is they bring. They don't, there's no break. There's no ability to sort of say, okay, I got 5 inches of rain. That's it. Stop. They tend to go on and on and on. And what was advantageous often can become deadly and, set communities back. So it's a hard question to answer. It's a little bit long-winded, but in some places they are advantageous. In most places, they tend to bring more harm than good.
Last question. Sandy B, Four Rivers, wants to know, are hurricane seasons and disasters getting worse when we do have a hurricane?
This is actually a really good question because there's a lot of misinformation out there on this topic. So I think I understand the context, or at least I'm going to take a gamble. So while the overall number of storms themselves doesn't appear to be changing, like the number of storms that you get in a given season, they don't appear to be changing, or if they're changing very little. And the overall wind intensity itself appears to only be changing a little bit to not at all. The hazards that they are bringing with them, namely the water hazards, is changing quite a bit and not in the right direction. We're seeing more cases of these heavy rains. Remember, I just talked about before, they tend to overdo it more than they underdo it. These heavy rain events, we're seeing more cases of storms stalling to contribute to that heavy rain and put it all in one location. We're seeing bigger storm surges. We're seeing more water-based impacts. And that is pretty slam dunk in the scientific community. There are other aspects of this that are still sort of under scientific discovery, analysis, and research. So I think as long as you sort of stay in that water, the water-based hazards are definitely getting worse, and don't venture too far beyond that. You'll be safely grounded in what we really know at the time.
This is probably a very good point for us to remind everyone that if they do have additional questions, and I know people have questions throughout the year, but during hurricane season, they have questions. What's the best way to get information? What's the National Hurricane Center web address?
So we are hurricanes.gov, hurricanes.gov. If you type that in, or I'm guessing if you just search, it would be one of the most popular search results. The National Hurricane Center is a federal entity. We're the only ones. We're the only ones that do this federally. So, if you find other entities that look like us or mimic us, they probably aren't federal in nature. So we're paid for entirely by taxpayer dollars. We're not a for-profit. We're not looking to make. We can't. That's against the law. And so that speaks to our motivation. We're not trying to sell you something. We're here because our staff have a tremendous passion for public safety and arming you with facts and information to help protect your life. And our website is the premier source of hurricane information, both real time during a storm and this time of year for preparedness activities.
And I have to say, ladies and gentlemen, from a personal standpoint, I have kept in touch with these professional people for quite a number of years. When they say they are dedicated, hurricane season is over, they go have a cup of coffee and they come right back to work. I mean, quite literally, they are working to keep us safe around the clock. So last year, we touched on evacuations. We didn't have a lot of cause for evacuations, but in years past, I can tell you, because I've gotten caught up in a couple of them myself, evacuation roads clogged, people running out of gas. But there's a little bit of a different thought process now that you don't necessarily have to evacuate far in that process.
So yeah, so if you went through a hurricane 10, 15, 20 years ago, you had a totally different user experience than you had now, probably a very unpleasant user experience. And that was because the science and our ability to pinpoint who was going to get the deadliest part of a hurricane was more limited back then. Fast forward, now we've made dramatic improvements in predictability over the last 10 years. We can really be surgical with anticipating where the worst impacts are going to be. That is then passed to emergency managers, who then can be more surgical with the evacuation orders, which puts less people on the road. So you'll see the roads less, not completely free, but less congested. You're seeing less run on fuel. You're seeing less of those, big, poor evacuation experiences than you did in the past. And we're getting better and better each year. So, this is one of those cases where I tell people to let go of their historical knowledge of how an evacuation was, because we're really getting much, much better at this overall.
That the evacuation concept leads me to talk about water, because that is something that you really can't outrun. If you are in a flood zone or storm surge zone, I think you are recognized, rightfully so, as one of the, if not the expert in storm surge. And people are becoming finally more aware of it, but it's a killer.
Yeah, so owing to, we've got great video footage that we can, whether it's drone footage or people setting up cameras. And so it has, storm surge has gone from this mysterious thing that it was hard to envision to now there's just all this footage that people can see. And once people see the footage, it's like, oh dear goodness, I don't want to be in that. And so that's really helped with public awareness. A lot of people have unfortunately experienced it in themselves, or know somebody who's experienced it themselves, and so word of mouth is sort of going around. It has historically been the number one killer in a hurricane, the largest cause of death in a hurricane. Up until a few years ago, it was contributed to 50% of total deaths in hurricanes. Owing to this awareness campaign and better public understanding, that has dropped precipitously, and now storm surge is not the leading cause of death in hurricanes. It's still water, but it's this freshwater inland flooding, meaning traditional rain coming down and flooding. And this is hard for people because, they see it rain every day, especially live in Florida. Good Lord, you see it rain every minute during the summer. And, when something happens all the time, every day, it's very hard to teach people how that phenomenon can suddenly become life-threatening. Like, it's routine. It's almost a punchline joke here in Florida that it's raining, or wait 5 minutes, it'll stop raining. How do you go from that to convincing people that event is deadly? That's one of the great challenges that lies before us.
Without getting into politics, because I know you can't, and I don't want you to. I don't want to get into politics. But what are the big challenges, starting at our local up through county and state? What do you see as the person helping to direct the safety efforts and awareness? What are the challenges that our governmental leaders are facing going into hurricane season?
They're facing the same challenges as you and I talked about a second ago. There's so many voices in out there saying things, and I'm sure there's people who are well-intentioned and they think they're doing something good. But when there's that many voices, when there's that much information flooding everybody's minds, it becomes hard to act, right? You're just taking in information. At some point, you get saturated, you get exhausted, you throw up your hands and say, these people don't know what they're talking about. You know what I mean? That's the traditional reaction. And that happens at state and local levels too, where they're trying to get critical information out there. And basically, the lines of communication are clobbered with irrelevant or often misleading information. So that's one of the things we all, when we sort of come together and work with emergency managers and local officials and politicians, like that's one of the things that we talk about. How can we collectively punch through the noise?
I asked this question last year as we got towards the end of the program, as we're doing now. What keeps you up at night from everything that you're doing and all of your experience? What keeps you awake at night worrying about the what if?
A rapid intensifier that forms right off the coastline somewhere. So much of what people think about a hurricane is not based off the forecast, but based off what it is right now. So you look at it in a satellite image, a full-on Cat 5 with the classic satellite image. You don't need me. People are going to run for the hills. They're going to do what they need to do. Messaging is pretty easy because people know. But what if it's a Cat 1 that rapidly develops overnight while people are asleep to a Cat 5, and by the time they wake up to it and see it, their ability to react is gone. The storm's right on your doorstep, that sort of stuff. And if you think going from a Cat 1 to a Cat 5 is some sort of overnight, is hyperbole. It happens all the time. We see examples of this all the time. So that scenario unfolding right on the coastline somewhere, that because I understand what that means from a surge perspective, I understand what that means from a societal response perspective. It's going to be a big killer when that situation unfolds.
Tampa Bay, West Coast, that area, as we chatted last year, you had some very eye-opening thoughts and some sobering thoughts about the what if that happened in the Tampa Bay area and there was a direct hit. Yeah. Has your thinking changed any about that at all?
No, it's even stronger because Tampa has experienced the periphery of many storms, glancing blows, near misses, dodged bullets, whatever you want to call it. That has led to an overall sense up there that's what a hurricane is. Like that, whatever they experience in those past events, that's what a hurricane is, and that's as bad as it gets. And I assure you, if you take the full-on brunt of a hurricane with the full-on 15 to 20 feet of surge, it's going to be 10 times that bad, and people are not thinking that way. So it's a major hurricane that hits Tampa, not narrowly misses Tampa, not peels off at the very end. I mean, actually hits Tampa. It is beyond what anyone listening to this podcast can mentally imagine. And that is going to be a back-crushing event to the community, and it's going to have a high mortality rate. It just is.
Personal note. Last year in Tampa General Hospital with my wife for some medical issues that I won't go into, beautiful room, looking out at the bay and the Gulf of Mexico. And I'm thinking, what you just said, it's not just something that is going to be devastating, but we're talking about infrastructure too. We're talking about hospital and all those other things that, I think a lot of people don't stop and think it's not just a hurricane coming, it's what's left over after it's gone. Fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope that was the case where a barrier or a wall was erected around Tampa General.
It was.
So I'm here to square the knot on that user experience. That was the state working with us to identify a problem well ahead of time, and then proactively through the expertise that we're supplying them. That is a great case of government in action. Right, it's sort of a fad now to make fun of government. That is a great case of state, local, and federal government all working in tandem to produce that outcome. So what a great real world example to show how it's working. And your mind was absolutely in the right place. The fact that you can see Tampa Bay from Tampa General is warning number one. And it's not just that, it's just that particular hospital is sort of a linchpin of that area. So for people who don't know that area, it's in a critical facility. And so if that facility is inaccessible or not able to function at full capacity, it's going to have a cascading impact on the community for days. And let me make that less abstract. Let's say that you hear that the wait line at the emergency room is 18 hours. And outside you're cleaning up your yard and you cut yourself. And you say, well, it's not worth standing in line for 18 hours. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to ride it out at home. I'm going to tough it out. And then that becomes infected. Or what if you're a diabetic? Or what if you have pre-existing conditions? And rather than seek medical attention, you forego it. You decide to wait. I'm going to wait to the ER. I'm going to wait for a week, right? And then you have a heart attack or you have a complication, whatever. This is happening. We're starting to study, well, not at Hurricane Center. Your researchers are starting to study this. It's called a mortality tail. And what we're seeing is that this mortality tail extends well beyond the hurricane. Not just weeks, not just months, in some cases, years. The lack of access to health care can create a cascading health crisis for an individual. And what we're seeing is it's often a spike in mortality 2 weeks, 2 months, after the event. So this is why it's so important to keep those hospitals up and running, every single one of them. This is why the state being so proactive to ensure that hospital remained up and operational was so critical. What a great, I know it's a difficult story to tell, but what a great story to help people understand how this really works at the ground level.
Jamie, we've covered a lot of territory. Is there anything that we have? And I know there's things like your evacuation list and all the things that you need to know. And that's something that people can get down into a granular level. But from a bigger picture, from your vantage point, anything that we haven't touched upon that you would like to add?
Yeah, often this time of year, as we're trying to get people to focus on hurricane readiness and preparedness, there tends to be a lot of distractions for people out there. And so maybe we should attack this from a different angle and just eliminate the distractions. And so before it even happens, I'm guessing there's going to be a few days where people are talking about a new category scale or Cat 6 or something to that effect that's going to get everybody all spun up. Straight from the horse's mouth. There are no efforts underway to change the hurricane scale. There's nothing underway. We've seen nothing in the research that would push us in that direction. Storms aren't getting substantially stronger that would warrant a Cat 6. I mean, a Category 5 is already catastrophic, so I don't know what word you would slap on to be worse than catastrophic. So the scale is here. It is what it is. So before that story gets out there and gets everybody sort of spun up, that's a distraction that would take people away from hurricane preparedness. And come late May or whenever my schedule allows, if you live next to me on a Saturday morning, at some point you would hear a loud noise, and that'd be me testing my two generators. One's a backup. And going through my garage and getting ready, making sure the supplies. I have to throw things out some year because they get old, replenish, that sort of stuff. But we practice what we preach here. We're not just talking heads and talking points. You would see me, and some of my neighbors do see me and want to talk to me about it. But it's true. We practice what we preach here. I just reinforced to put in a new roof on my house, and everybody wanted to talk to me about the materials that were, I chose for a new roof. Hardening your home is one of the best things you can do. Making sure that you have proper insurance. Proper insurance is one of the best mitigation strategies you can employ, and that's just not homeowners insurance, because remember, homeowners insurance does not cover flooding. If you're in a flood prone area, you need to supplement traditional insurance with a flood insurance policy.
All good information. Jamie, I want to personally thank you for taking the time and First off, if you need help and that day off is upon us and you need someone to come and give you a hand, I will be there because I believe in giving back and you're helping us. So I'll volunteer.
Well, thank you. We always need help. So, and you're helping us now by helping to get the word out. I'll give you credit. You're the first one. My next few months will be insanely busy with speeches and outreach and this sort of stuff. But yours is the first. So you get that award as being the first one, at least on my docket, education and outreach opportunity for the 2026 hurricane season.
You're going to be at the Governor's Hurricane Conference?
We are. Several of us will be there, speaking, talking about the changes that we will be making announcemements on changes to our products and services in the coming weeks, and we'll be at the Hurricane Conference to sort of unpack that for everyone.
And that's coming up mid-May, 14, 15, thereabouts. I don't know the exact dates. I'll continue to pause here and carry on the conversation if you're looking it up. But it's in Palm Beach County at the Palm Beach County Convention Center. I plan to be there, ladies and gentlemen, to get any additional information that I can share here on our program because I take this serious as well. We want people to be safe. I'm going to be there and I want to shake your hand and thank you for letting me be the first to help share this information. And the door is open. If we get into season and something is happening and you need that extra little voice, we would be proud to be that voice for you. So, Jamie Rhome, my pleasure, Deputy Director for the National Hurricane Center. We appreciate what you do. And again, you're welcome to come back at any time you would like.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
And I am Sam Yates, and this is the Florida Business Forum, helping you be prepared because we believe in preparedness. Together, I know it sounds like a Red Cross ad, prepare, survive, and recover. And we can do that, but it's going to take all of us working together, so that's what we're here for. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great day, and in the meantime, tune in and share this information with as many people as you can. That will help them be prepared. Have a great day, everybody.
The Florida Business Forum is dedicated to showcasing Florida businesses and CEOs of all sorts to promote their business or not-for-profit in the only business forum of its type in Florida. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, the Florida Business Forum is now accepting guest applications. Have a great day, everyone, and stay tuned for more business.